Hi, I'm Christian from cxomni, and I would like to welcome you once again this month. And I'm really looking forward to an exciting talk today after welcoming experts from various industries and sectors as guest speakers in the recent month. Our CEO, Robert, who is right next to me here, has made himself available today to tell us a little bit more about why journey management is the perfect basis for achieving service excellence. Of course, we have also planned some time for questions in the last few minutes. Just write your questions directly into the chat or use the question tool provided by GoToWebinar. Before Robert will start, I would like to say a few words about cxomni and then hand over to him without further ado. Who is cxomni? cxomni is the leading provider of software as a service solution in the field of customer journey management, which was also confirmed by Forrester in the latest wave for journey mapping. And what we do is we help companies to design customer experiences with the aim of increasing revenue and saving costs at the same time. In most of our projects, the first step to establish a journey management is to establish a journey framework that's standards for journey management, and thereby ensuring that customer journeys do not end up as a nice poster with post-its on the wall or in the depths of any whiteboarding tool and will never be looked at again, but rather that we can establish a process together with our customers that aims on gaining regular insights and deriving measures to support the two mentioned goals of increasing revenue and saving costs. And that's it for cxomni, and we will hear a lot more about how you can do that in your everyday customer journey management life from Robert now, and I now wish you lots of fun.
Good evening, good morning, everybody. For today's session, thanks that you've made yourself available. I'm also quite excited, and let me tell you, there's quite a lot of information that we will go through today. So I'd like to take you onto a journey. Basically, firstly, we start with a brief look into the rear mirror of where this entire thing came from, reflect on what is currently happening, what's our reality. And I'm always a big friend of then kind of taking an outside look into how other industries or other competencies are solving similar problems. And then, of course, let's take a look on how journey management can provide us answers in terms of providing a much better service or laying the foundation for good services. And then, of course, the question is how will it further evolve? So what's next, so to speak? So sit back, relax. I'm also quite eager to, of course, take your questions at the end. And I would say, let's get started with a view into the rear view mirror. And it's a quick journey back into the 90s. It was a time when I personally lived in the UK. So it was all the excitement about technology, and technology can ease our lives, and technology will help us to understand clients and customers, customer interaction. And I do remember in one of the shows, Bill Gates once said, in a very social way, that in the millennium we will find the technology is able to target specifically each individual customer with our messaging. And I thought it's quite interesting. And so it went on and on and on. And in that time, so we're talking about the end of the 90s, one thing happened. And I became witness of that when I lived in the UK, was the basically the advent of Eurostar, which started, and Eurostar was one of those new train services that were offered. And if you take a look back in the time, so we had the old Southwestern trains, which you can see on the left, which that specific type is a very sort of nice, posh and shiny version of it, as opposed to sort of the airplanes provided by British Airways. And the question was, why would anybody want to go for a service that most people would associate with bad quality and low emotional, really, vibrations? And so the question then was, how can we position such a service and differentiate it? And that was the time when journey management was really born. It was a niche consultancy in the UK, in Cambridge, that had sort of brought this concept, and it very quickly became something that was well established. And I guess we all have seen or have lived through the experience of such workshops, all kind of with flip charts, post-its, very interactive and very sort of dynamic. And I think that's a very important aspect of the journey mapping at the time, that people were brought together, people were able to communicate, and it was quite intuitive as to how to do that. And even today, people speak about the journey, even though people mean different things. And it was this close cooperation and the understanding of defining a common ground, which then, of course, quickly ran into a few challenges there. And it was very often this approach of fire and forget, because we all know you sit in a workshop, you do your flip charts, and either you document those in nice drawing tools, or it's just simply then forgotten. And the more complex things get, and I do remember a few workshops in the past, you had whiteboards 5 meters length, etc., and you were scribbling along and designing your journeys, and sort of keeping control of the perspectives and on what the journey is, especially for complex models, was very hard. And very quickly you realize that once you have completed such workshops, it's sort of diminished to a level of insignificance, which you of course don't want to have, because what you've done was very valuable. And so that has sort of course evolved, but that was the common notion of what journey management really was. And if we sit back and take a look as to where we are today, I think we find still the situation that service excellence or good service is really a type of buzzword, right? Of course, people would say customer is king, really, which also was one of those book titles back in the 90s. And it's still something that sort of sits around, and depending on what perspective we take, either as a customer ourselves, we have certain expectations, either if you are buying luxury goods or you're doing some kind of very simple things that you acquire, or even more so if you think in company terms, if you take decisions or you make definitions on behalf of your company, perspectives quickly change, and very quickly we start to alienate ourselves from the customer view to the service provider thing, and that has a huge impact. And if we would go a step further and say, look, let's see if I would ask everybody in this audience, say, give me one line of definition what service excellence or what good service is, and if we would then start to collect the feedback, I think very hardly we would find a common denominator. I've done it in the past a couple of times, and I was really amazed in terms of the responses and replies I got. But it wasn't that clear that people would have said that's the excellent service. And I think that's all fair to say, because services are very specific, and there's no common rule to grab it. But still, there's the desire to make it more tangible and more comparable and more manageable in a way. Having said that, I think life hasn't stopped, and things were going on, and it's getting even more complicated because we've got different channels, multi-channel approaches, and people keep juggling around different channels with different messages, and keeping that all in sync is a challenge in itself. We've got product variants which pop up, even though that very often those products or service, they're quite comparable in a certain way. We are also talking about, can we provide products and services on a global level? So it's the globalization that kicks in. And what I haven't put onto that slide, and we all have experienced that, is the question of the IT systems that go with it. So where do we get our data from? How do we map such services? And it's a zillion options of architectural approaches that sit there, and getting that in line, of course, is can be challenging. Overlaying to all of that comes another dimension, which is purely human. It's the political component, and especially in larger corporations, it's very hard to break down those barriers around architecture and transparency, visibility. And I've experienced it myself when I was a consultant working for the automotive industry, where you have different levels of sales stages across different countries. It's just something you can hardly get a hand on and it's all driven by structure and politics and incentives of the people behind. Very naturally, how we try to respond to that, maybe it's a German approach, but I also find that quite often is we try to create some form of control through measurement. And that's why things like NPS and CSAT, very important tools, don't get me wrong, but very often used to fill the void of transparency and control. And sometimes, if you have a certain number that you can read from an Excel sheet, from paper, or even from your screen, gives you a bit more comfort and control. But at the end of the day, right, it doesn't really answer you certain questions. And taking you on a quick German course here, the question always is then when, where, and how do you get those data points collected, and are they really reliable? Are they comparable? So we do have instruments at hand, but very often we are lacking to break down certain barriers, or at least to understand how they all relate, and then try to make it sort of more comparable and standardizable behind that. And that's the point where I would like to take you to a detour and like to take a look on how other industries, how other disciplines try to solve similar situations. And if you see those examples, you say, that's of course, that's very obvious that they do it the way they do it. And then the question, then, of course, will be, where does it leave us? Those individuals who are forced to develop services, to provide services, and of course, to become better at that on a daily basis. And the first example I have for you is in mechanical engineering. So that's a screenshot taken from Teamcenter. It's one of the leading CAD platforms in the world, and you see it's a very complex model of an airplane turbine. You can see it is assembled out of certain components which can be reused in other turbines. You've got certain data points that are predefined in the model as you make it. You've got quality checks built in there, quality data. You've got operational data in there. And that gives the engineer quite a lot of information about what the product is, how it will behave. It also has a very high impact onto your risk exposure and liability exposure that you have. So that's why those data points and the standardized way to design such an aircraft engine or any other sort of product item is quite important. And just designing it is not enough, and you find in mechanical engineering that it's all embedded into a larger context of a product lifecycle management system, PLM system, where you have from the design, construction, manufacturing, the tooling behind, and then of course how to dismantle it, and all the information that goes with it allows you to constantly improve, reuse, and foster cooperation or collaboration across country borders in very complex teams from different perspectives. Very complex, very important, but as I said, for liability and quality reasons, that's a must. And nobody would argue the case whether engineers would require the investment for CAD or PLM system at all. The next example that I'd like to share with you is around process management. And very often the CX designers that I've been speaking to in companies, they always keep looking at their colleagues from the process management teams, because they all have budget, they all have tools, they all have the KPIs, and they are accepted and respected for what they do. And there, quite a few have said, well, actually, we should have the same thing in our CX or service design. And what was quite remarkable, I mean, many years back, and we were talking about Mike Hammer in the 80s when he started business process re-engineering, and the first sort of methods, frameworks started to exist, how to model processes. It has, of course, evolved. So it's not just the modeling itself. Those tools are now part of process mining. You have KPIs, you get a lot of information. You can constantly improve your organization. You have full transparency as to what's happening. And again, that's an area, a domain where nobody would question any investment, because it's a given. It's something that adds value and it can be measured. I think those are two very strong examples. When I reflect on what the key points really are as to what makes those areas successful, what are the key points that sort of drive the success, the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, standards. They've got standard methods, standard syntax, standardized sort of ways of developing such model-defined methods. They also have clearly defined quality measures, quality points, and KPIs which are being used that everybody understands. And very important, it's the teamwork aspect. So regardless of whether you work on the process side or on the engineering side, you always work in teams. Very complex models, but it's always this team spirit that's quite important here. A set of tools which are established and the tools which are being used. And very often those tools go ahead or go in line with a common understanding of how such IT reference architectures should look like. And with that, we always talk about very quickly about data integration models and patterns that add value by combining different perspectives, different data sources, enriching such models and generating value out of that. And last but not least, it's about roles and responsibilities. So it's about governance of, how are those models being maintained, who does what, how is information distributed and shared with others. And it's all something which does make sense. And regardless of those two examples I showed with you, they're very good in those 8 disciplines. So where does it leave us, right? So we, and I just looking in the audience virtually, we are sort of tasked really to sort of provide service excellence, to really do the best in not just experience way, but also in a commercial way. And I would say if we take that, or if you take these 8 disciplines, I think they're sufficient prerequisite for what we are doing. And if you then again look onto where we are at, and that's probably a bit of a provocative statement, I think we are not there yet. There's a huge gap, and the question is, how can we master that gap? How can we fill it? That's what I would like to talk to you about next. And you wouldn't be surprised if, of course, I wouldn't say it's not the journey. It is the journey, I think, which can help sort of fill that gap and to become an essential part into in what we do on a daily basis. And again, how has it evolved? We saw in the very beginning this little sort of AI-generated picture of this Lego scenery, right, with people standing around a flip chart. It's the journey mapping discipline, of course, and that is not just on flip charts. We saw that drawing tools have come into use where we have a common approach, got certain tools. And what we also have experienced, and that's a discussion we're having with lots of our clients, is, there comes a point in time where, and I keep referring to it as the fire and forget demarcation line, when such models become far more complex, and we then go away from just drawing towards a more engineered approach where you have a bit more intelligence behind to allow you to maintain such models and have your own sort of life cycle of reusing them and taking them further on board. And with that, again, the question comes, how far can I reuse such models? How recent are the models, and do they really reflect what I find in reality? And can I demonstrate a certain value of what I have done and what's the effect of that? And the answer, of course, is yes, but there are certain limitations. And it all looks very nice. It all looks very comprehensive. And that's what we, for example, see in terms of how journey models could look like. But I guess there's another sort of evolutionary step which we can take, and we should really take, which is then, of course, the transition from pure journey mapping towards journey management. And as we do that and become even more sort of part of an integrated tool, which is open, we see that more of those success factors are realized, right? It's then, of course, the quality checks. It's then we can talk about a far better collaborative approach. And we already have some certain rules and regulations behind, because especially if journeys become more and more important and the foundation for not just things like experience and emotions, but even for compliance aspects, risk aspects, or cost aspects, that becomes, of course, of ultimate importance. And one of the things that we find there is then, of course, to start working in an object-oriented style, like the engineer reusing parts or kind of components. you can do exactly the same with your sub-journeys, for instance. You can re-engineer your journeys in such a way that you start to refer back to a library of things, which allows you to standardize, to detect even sort of redundancies that you might have, or unwanted, unsolicited redundancies, which of course cost you. So you can reduce that, and that's an approach which really helps you to drive far more efficiency and to foster such sort of engineering-like approach. It's not just the map itself. I think the value then lies also in taking data and bringing that into the context of your journey, which can be customer feedback, of course. It could be performance information, it could be transactional information, but at least that it's just the picture, the model you have, and the model becomes then more of relevance the more data you bring in there. Again, that's something you have to get visibility of, and as you can imagine, journey models can become quite complex. With the level of detail you also add, it becomes even more complex, and navigating through those, through the list and plethora of information you have, that's when tooling becomes of true help. Sort of, you know, concepts like view styles are really important, that you, depending on the audience, you try to present your journeys, and you depending on what you want to achieve, you can then collapse things, but the model remains the same. It's all consistent, and you can adapt accordingly. Here, for instance, it's a service blueprint, which is of course important to the service managers. Somebody from the controlling department probably would like to see different things to it. I think we are not fully there yet. I think there's far more room of where we can maneuver and even enhance the foundation for really service excellence if we continue with that perspective. And one thing I'd like to sort of highlight is a story which we've heard about 6, 7, or even 8 years ago. I can't remember it exactly, but it was the time when a huge European software company, I think it's called SAP, acquired Qualtrics, and very immediately they had this reflex to say, oh look, now we are able to combine experience data with operational data. And I think the story was really good, but we all know how the story ended. There was a big divestiture of SAP, spinning off or divesting Qualtrics, and was taken over by a private equity firm, because there was one missing piece there. Because in theory it's possible, but what is the missing link between experience data and operational data? And I believe it's the journey itself that we have in there. And so it's, if we spin that story further from journey management towards journey transformation, then this all starts to really make sense. Because if we then add the data and architecture integration and find the link to the process management side, we can really make far more educated decisions on how we want to move this forward. Because with that model, when you know how process works, so it's the inside out perspective, the journey is outside in, and the data behind, I think that gives us a massive and huge sort of and strong instrument to model our business differently. We are able then, with the objective approach, also start talking about outsourcing journeys. Process we outsource on a constant basis, and customer experience we also outsource. Think about all the call centers. But if we have the concept of a defined journey with defined measurement points, we are now able to play that card as well. And I think that's the way this will go, and that's something that we are also, of course, heavily engaged from cxomni to make it happen. But again, we are not there yet. There's far more that needs to happen. And I think what I would like to see is that we need to continue to drive a standardization for what journey mapping really is. What are the components? I mean, we saw the examples in process management. We've got BPMN as an international accepted method and way to model processes. Intuitively, we know what a touch point is, how a journey should look like, but it's not really formalized. Every vendor has different flavors to it. And I think it's quite important that we really sort of start working on that in terms of establishing such a standard. And the next thing is, I'm really missing some understanding as to how an architectural layer should really look like. I mean, I had a conversation even today around data architectures of how that all should fit together. And to me, journey management, journey transformation tools are not the owners of data. They use data, but the question is, how do you integrate, where you take it from, is something that still is to be discussed, sort of further driven. And at the end of the day, journey management is all about mindset, right? So it's lots of companies have gone a far way as to becoming really journey driven, but and I see especially in the US, companies are far more open and have adapted the idea. It's something that I think in other parts of the world we need to sort of still continue to foster, because it's a new view. It's not just about emotions and something which sort of sits there as a side effect. I think it's a vital and important part of how we manage our business, and I think that's something which you all have to continue to work on. And yeah, I think it's something that will keep us busy over the next sort of 2 years, I'm pretty certain. So I've talked a lot. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, I think, Christian, you're open to sort of go through the tool and fire off if there's anything unclear. If you disagree, I'm very curious to hear from what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Very interesting. We have quite a few questions. One that came quite often is if we will share the slides, and yes, we will share the slides via webcast. We will inform everyone who joined us for today during the next few days where you can find the webcast, and we will also provide a short summary of the webinar. And now let's go into questions that relate to your speak itself. So first question is, when is the right time to use a real journey management tool?
Well, how long's a piece of string? I think it follows a natural reflex and it's at that point when you go beyond. I have a model. We've invested time into drawing something up, but the overhead for keeping it recent in terms of we'd like to change it, we'd like to modify it, sort of becomes too expensive in terms of the effort doing that. That's the point where people should start about thinking using a database kind of tool where you can start working together with lots of people. You can start making changes, and you've got this modular and object-oriented approach. That's when we typically see people taking most use out of it. If you just start with a workshop and you kind of then flip chart, drawing tools, absolutely fine. But as soon as you start maintaining such models, that's the point in time when you should think about using a tool for it.
Thank you. I think next question perfectly connects to this one. And the question is, what data is relevant, and how do I know what other data is important in the context of service?
Well, naturally, the first most questions that we always keep receiving is, can you integrate information from tools identifying customer feedback, for instance? Yeah, that's clear. That's the obvious thing. Also, performance data that you get from web analytics tools, for instance, to learn about your website performance, for instance, or other things. I'd like to go one step ahead or further in terms of it's worthwhile considering whether commercial information makes sense. So you've got, say, take a journey where you have a certain touch point where you know that the insights that you gain, the evidence you have clearly underpins the fact that there's something definitely going wrong. If you know technically what it means in terms of improving the situation there, you easily can also add commercial information in terms of investment decisions. That's something you find. Or it's also volume information. And we had this conversation, Chris, around sort of risk exposure, right? When you, as of a sudden, are in a business where whatever service you offer has a very sort of big impact on your liability, because there's a certain warranty associated with it, and violating that has a certain cost associated. So information around the traffic size and the potential damage that could be done there is also quite important. And that goes far beyond the classical approach of how customer journey management is taken. So that's that's the trend that we see this thing go. So journey management becomes far more established in other use cases than it was originally conceived for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The last question is about standardization. The question is, who should drive forward standardization, and can we even wait until then?
Well, you know, we should have had it yesterday. I think it developed some momentum, and as we have seen in the process management, well, it took a long time for such notations to become a standard. There are a couple of natural drivers for it. One, of course, is kind of think tanks and research kind of companies such as the Foresters of the world. They can help sort of emphasize the necessity for it. But at the end of the day, I think it comes from industry bodies that are yet to be formed. I see lots of influences out there, CX circles, journey management circles, and I think it's a question of how those can work together. So tool providers, user groups to agree pragmatically on how standards should look like in that field. But let's see.
All right, thank you. Then with respect to the time, I would close questions here. And if you have any questions remaining or would like to talk to us directly, then feel free to contact us either via mail or via LinkedIn. You can see our QR codes to our LinkedIn pages right here. And one final piece of information, we are now taking a summer break with our webinar series, and we'll be back in October with new webinars, to which of course we would like to invite you. And to make sure you don't miss a single webinar, please sign up for our newsletter on our website or just follow us on LinkedIn, and you will be able to keep track of all of our webinars. Then thank you, Robert, for your talk, and thank you everyone for joining us for today, and I wish you a pleasant day.
Bye. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you.